My son told me to quit my job next month because he and his wife needed me to pay their bills while they reset. I was standing in my kitchen when he said it, holding a dish towel that still smelled like the lemon soap I'd used on the counters that morning. The words came out of his mouth so casually, like he was asking me to pass the salt. But what he was really asking for was my entire life. I didn't say yes. I didn't say no either. I just stood there, looking at the face of the boy I'd raised, trying to find him somewhere behind those expectant eyes. He was 42 years old. His wife stood beside him with her arms crossed, nodding like this was the most reasonable thing in the world. And maybe that's what scared me most, that they truly believed it was. "Mom, are you listening?" David said, leaning forward on my kitchen table. "We've talked about this. We need to make some changes, and you're in the best position to help." I folded the dish towel slowly, set it on the counter, poured myself a cup of coffee, even though my hands were shaking just enough that I didn't trust them. The ceramic mug was one Richard had given me years ago, back when we were young and mornings felt full of possibility instead of weighted with decisions I never imagined I'd have to make. What I didn't know then was that this moment, this quiet Tuesday afternoon in my small kitchen with the yellow curtains I'd sewn myself 30 years ago, was going to change everything. Not just between us, but inside me, in ways I couldn't have predicted and wouldn't have chosen, but that would ultimately save me from losing myself completely. Let me go back further than 6 months. Let me go back to the beginning, because I think that's where I made my first mistake. Not a big one. Not one you'd notice at the time. But the kind that compounds over years until you wake up one day and realize you've built a whole life on a foundation that was never quite solid. David was born on a Wednesday in March, during one of those late-season snowstorms that makes you forget spring is coming. Richard and I had been married 3 years. We were young, excited, terrified. All the things new parents are supposed to be. I remember holding David for the first time and thinking, I will do anything for you. Anything to keep you safe, to make you happy, to give you a better life than I had. And I did. Oh, I did. When he wanted piano lessons, I worked extra hours at the diner to pay for them. When he made the travel baseball team, Richard and I drove him to tournaments 3 states away, sleeping in budget motels and eating gas station sandwiches to afford the fees. When he wanted to go to the expensive college instead of the state school, we took out loans we'd spend 15 years paying off. I'm not complaining. I'm not. Every parent makes sacrifices. That's what love looks like, isn't it? But somewhere along the way, David learned that wanting something was the same as deserving it. That needing help was the same as being entitled to it. And I never corrected that belief because I was too busy making sure he had everything he needed. Richard used to joke that I'd give David the shirt off my back even if I was standing in a snowstorm. He'd laugh when he said it, but there was something else in his eyes. Concern maybe, or warning. I should have listened. David met Angela when he was 35. She was beautiful in that carefully constructed way, highlighted hair, white teeth, a wardrobe that looked effortless but probably cost more than my monthly mortgage. She worked in marketing at the time, something to do with social media influencers and brand partnerships that I never fully understood. She was charming at first, laughed at Richard's jokes, complimented my cooking, asked thoughtful questions about my work at the library. Richard died 6 months after they got engaged. Heart attack, sudden. He was 62, and we'd just started talking about retirement, about traveling to all the places we'd always said we'd go, but never had the time or money for. And then one Tuesday morning, he didn't wake up, and all those plans turned to smoke. David and Angela were wonderful during that time. They helped with the funeral arrangements. They came over every weekend for the first few months. Angela would clean my kitchen while David and I sorted through Richard's things, deciding what to keep and what to let go. I was grateful. So grateful I didn't notice the little comments that started creeping in. "This house is so big for just one person, Eleanor. You must be lonely here all by yourself. Have you thought about what you'll do if something happens and you need help?" At the time, I thought they were just worried about me, caring for me the way I'd always cared for David. What I didn't know was that they were planting seeds, testing the soil, getting ready to harvest. The first time David asked me for money was about a year after Richard died. He called on a Sunday evening, his voice tight with stress. "Mom, I hate to ask this, but we're in a bit of a bind. Angela's car died, and we need to come up with $3,000 for a down payment on a new one. Could you help us out? We'll pay you back as soon as my bonus comes through." $3,000. It was a lot, but I had it. Richard's life insurance had paid off the house, and I'd been careful with what was left. And this was my son, my only child. Of course I'd help. I wrote the check the next day. The bonus never came through. Or maybe it did, and they spent it on something else. Either way, I never saw that $3,000 again. And when I gently reminded David about it a few months later, he got defensive. "Mom, I thought that was a gift. You never said it was a loan." I hadn't said it was a gift either, but I let it go. What was I going to do? Take my son to small claims court? 6 months later, it was $2,000 for unexpected medical bills. Then $1,500 for home repairs. Then $1,000 here and $500 there for emergencies that seemed to come up with alarming regularity. I kept a list in my desk drawer, written in pencil, so I could erase it if I needed to, if I wanted to pretend it wasn't happening. By the time they showed up in my kitchen asking me to quit my job and fund their lifestyle, they'd borrowed, or rather, taken nearly $30,000 from me over the course of 4 years. That was only the beginning of understanding how deeply I'd been manipulated. Let me tell you about my job at the library, because that's important to understanding why their request felt like such a betrayal. I started working there part-time 3 years after Richard died. I needed something to fill the days, something to give me a reason to get dressed and leave the house. The pay was modest $12 an hour for 20 hours a week, but it wasn't about the money. It was about the routine, the purpose, the feeling that I was still part of the world. I worked the morning shift, Tuesday through Friday. I'd wake up at 6, make my coffee, tend to the garden if the weather was nice. By 8:30, I was walking through the library doors, greeting Sharon at the circulation desk, settling into my corner of the children's section. I read to the toddler groups on Tuesday mornings. I helped elementary schoolers find books for their reading reports. I organized the picture book section with the kind of care and attention that probably seemed excessive to some people, but brought me genuine joy. There was a little girl named Emma who came in every Wednesday with her grandmother. She was maybe 5, with wild curly hair and glasses too big for her face. She loved books about animals, horses especially. Every week I'd set aside new books I thought she'd like, and every week her face would light up when she saw them. "Miss Eleanor, you found more horse books?" That job paid me $240 a week before taxes. Barely enough to matter by most people's standards. But it mattered to me. It was mine. My time, my purpose, my small corner of the world where I was valued for something other than what I could give. And David wanted me to give it up so I could fund his mortgage and his car payments and his wife's wellness journey. The morning after they left my kitchen, after I'd stood there with my cold coffee and my shaking hands, and told them I needed time to think, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed watching the ceiling fan turn in the darkness, listening to the house settle around me. This house held 40 years of memories. Richard and I had bought it when David was 2. We painted every wall, refinished the hardwood floors ourselves, planted the oak tree in the front yard that was now taller than the roof. David had learned to ride his bike on this driveway. He'd posed for prom pictures on this front porch. He'd brought Angela here for the first time, and we'd all sat in the backyard, drinking lemonade and talking about their future. Now, that future apparently required me to sacrifice mine. I got up around 5, before the sun, and made coffee in the dark kitchen. Sat at the table with my hands wrapped around the warm mug, and tried to think clearly. The practical part of my brain knew I couldn't do what they were asking. My monthly expenses were about $1,800: mortgage, insurance and taxes, utilities, food, car insurance, health insurance, property maintenance, the small luxuries I allowed myself. My income was just under $1,000 from the library, plus about $1,200 from Social Security. I had savings, yes, but not enough to support 3 adults indefinitely. Not without draining everything Richard and I had worked our whole lives to build. But the mother part of my brain kept whispering, what if they really need you? What if you say no and something terrible happens? What if this is your fault somehow? That's what they were counting on, I realized. That voice, that guilt, that bone-deep belief that a good mother always finds a way to help. What I didn't know was that recognizing the manipulation was only the first step. The hard part would be learning to withstand it. I called Margaret at 7, knowing she'd be awake. Margaret had been an early riser since her husband died 12 years ago. She said the quiet morning hours were when she felt closest to him, when she could drink her coffee and remember without the weight of the whole day pressing down. "Eleanor," she said, her voice warm even through the phone. "You're up early." "I need to talk," I said. "Come over. I'll make breakfast." Margaret lived 10 minutes away in a tidy bungalow with a porch full of hanging plants. When I arrived, she was already setting out plates, scrambled eggs, toast, fresh strawberries from the farmer's market. We ate in her sunny kitchen while I told her everything. The years of loans, the gradual escalation, the request to quit my job, the way they'd looked at me like I was being unreasonable for hesitating. Margaret listened without interrupting, the way good friends do. When I finished, she set down her fork and looked at me with those sharp blue eyes that had seen too much of life to be fooled by pretty words. "Eleanor, do you know what this reminds me of?" "What?" "My sister Karen." I knew about Karen. She died 5 years ago, bitter and broke, estranged from most of her family. Karen spent her whole life bailing out her kids, Margaret continued. Every time they got in trouble, every time they made a bad choice, she was there with her checkbook and her excuses. She told herself she was helping, being a good mother. What happened? They bled her dry, and when the money ran out, they disappeared. She died alone in a nursing home she could barely afford. And none of her kids came to the funeral because they were mad she didn't leave them anything in her will. Margaret reached across the table and took my hand. "I don't want that to be you." "David's not like that," I said, but the words felt hollow even as I said them. "Maybe not," Margaret said gently. "But Eleanor, Love without boundaries isn't love. It's surrender. And you've been surrendering for a long time. Those words settled into my chest like stones. That was only the beginning of seeing clearly. I spent that day in my garden. It was late April and everything was coming back to life. The hostas unfurling their leaves. The tulips I'd planted last fall pushing through the soil in bursts of red and yellow. The lilac bush starting to bud. I'd always found peace in the garden. There was something honest about it. You plant seeds, you water them, you pull the weeds, and if you're patient and consistent, things grow. No manipulation. No guilt. Just cause and effect. I was deadheading the early daffodils when my phone rang. David. I almost didn't answer. But old habits are hard to break. Hi, honey, I said, my voice careful. Mom, have you thought about what we talked about? I'm still thinking. A pause. Then Angela's voice in the background, muffled but insistent. Mom, Angela wants to know if you can give us an answer by this weekend. We need to make plans. Plans for what? For our finances. For our future. We need to know if you're going to be part of that or not. The way he said it, like I was the one being difficult. Like they were offering me some kind of opportunity instead of asking me to give up my independence. David, I need more time. How much time? His voice had an edge now. I don't know. This is a big decision. It's not that big. It's just family helping family. There it was again. That phrase they kept using like a weapon. Family helping family. As if the definition of family was one-sided. As if help only flowed in one direction. I'll call you when I've decided, I said. Mom, I hung up. My hands were shaking again, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was from anger. An anger I'd been pushing down for so long I'd almost forgotten what it felt like. What I didn't know was that anger, properly channeled, could become something else. Something like strength. That evening I did something I hadn't done in years. I pulled out all my financial documents and spread them across the dining room table. Bank statements, investment accounts, Richard's life insurance policy, my will, the deed to the house. I wanted to see, in black and white, exactly where I stood. The house was worth about $250,000 paid off. I had $90,000 in savings. What was left after all those loans to David, another $180,000 in retirement accounts that I couldn't touch without penalties for another couple years. My monthly income was just over $2,000. On paper, I looked comfortable. Maybe even well off compared to some people my age. But if I gave David and Angela $3,000 a month, my savings would be gone in 2.5 years. And then what? I'd be 70, broke, completely dependent on Social Security and whatever scraps my son decided to throw my way. The thought made my stomach turn. I also pulled out that list I'd been keeping. The loans, the emergencies, all the times I'd written a check and told myself it was the last time. $30,000 over 4 years. Money that could have funded my own retirement, my own dreams, my own security. I sat at that table until midnight, surrounded by papers, doing math I should have done years ago. By the time I went to bed, I knew what I had to do. I just didn't know if I had the courage to do it. The next morning, I called a lawyer. It felt dramatic, excessive even. But Margaret's story about her sister had planted a seed of real fear in my mind. What if this didn't stop? What if they pushed harder? What if they tried to declare me incompetent or take control of my finances somehow? I needed to know my options. The lawyer's name was Patricia Connolly. She was about my age, maybe a little older. with silver hair cut in a sharp bob and eyes that suggested she'd seen every kind of family drama there was. I sat in her office, all dark wood and law books, and told her my story. I expected her to tell me I was overreacting, that this was just a normal family conflict. Instead, she pulled out a legal pad and started taking notes. "Mrs. Patterson," she said when I finished, "what you're describing is a pattern of financial exploitation. It's more common than you might think, especially with adult children and aging parents." "Aging," I repeated. "I'm only 68. I know. But to some people, that's old enough to be vulnerable, old enough to be manipulated." She explained the concept of undue influence, how family members could pressure older adults into giving them money or property by exploiting their emotions, their love, their fear of abandonment. "Have they threatened you in any way?" she asked. I thought about the assisted living comments, the implications that I might not be able to manage on my own. Not exactly threatened, but they've suggested that I might need help soon, that they're worried about me. Patricia's mouth tightened. "That's called groundwork. They're establishing a narrative that you're not competent to make your own decisions. That way, if you refuse to help them, they can claim it's because you're confused or declining, not because you're setting healthy boundaries." The words hit me like cold water, because that's exactly what it felt like. They were building a case against me, brick by subtle brick. "What can I do?" I asked. "Several things. First, document everything. Every conversation, every request, every comment about your health or competency. Save texts, emails, anything in writing. Second, get a medical evaluation showing you're of sound mind. Third, consider updating your will and power of attorney to ensure they're airtight. And fourth," she paused, "fourth, you need to decide what kind of relationship you want with your son going forward. Because once you set boundaries, things are going to get worse before they get better." That was only the beginning of preparing for war. I left Patricia's office with a folder full of information and a knot in my stomach. I'd hired her to draft a letter, something formal, legal, that would make my position clear. But even as I agreed to it, part of me kept hoping it wouldn't be necessary. That David would call and apologize. That this would all turn out to be a misunderstanding. That hope lasted 2 more days. On Thursday, Angela called. Her voice was honey-sweet, the way it got when she wanted something. "Eleanor, hi. I was thinking, why don't we come over this weekend and help you with some spring cleaning? I noticed last time we were there that the gutters looked like they needed clearing, and David could help you go through the attic. You've probably got so much stuff up there you don't need any more." My attic, where I kept the boxes of Richard's things I couldn't bear to sort through yet, where I'd stored David's childhood belongings, thinking someday maybe he'd want them for his own children, where I kept my mother's china and my grandmother's quilts and all the accumulated memories of a life. "That's kind of you," I said carefully, "but I don't need help with that right now." "Are you sure?" "It's no trouble. And you know, Eleanor, at your age, it's dangerous to be climbing around in attics and on ladders. We just want to make sure you're safe." There it was. That phrase again. At your age. "I'm perfectly capable," I said, an edge creeping into my voice. "Of course you are. I didn't mean, I just think it would be nice to spend time together. We haven't seen you in a week. We miss you." I wanted to believe that. God, how I wanted to believe that. "Maybe another time," I said. The sweetness in her voice evaporated. "Eleanor, are you avoiding us?" "No, I'm just Because it really feels like you are. Ever since we asked for your help, you've been distant. Cold, even. I have to say, it's really hurtful. And there was the guilt trip. The turning of tables. Suddenly, I was the one being unreasonable. I was the one causing problems. Angela, I need some space to think. That's all. Space to think about what? About whether you love your own son? My breath caught. That's not fair, isn't it? Because from where I'm standing, it seems like you care more about your money than your family. And I think that's something you need to think about, Eleanor. I really do. She hung up before I could respond. I stood in my kitchen, phone in hand, feeling like I'd been slapped. The worst part was that her words had found their target. That small, insidious voice in my head that whispered, maybe she's right. Maybe I am being selfish. Maybe I do care too much about money and not enough about family. It took me an hour and a call to Margaret to recognize that voice for what it was. Not truth, but conditioning. Years and years of being told that good mothers sacrifice everything, that love means giving until there's nothing left. What I didn't know was that recognizing manipulation is easier than resisting it. Sunday came, and with it, the scheduled meeting. I'd agreed to it earlier in the week, before Angela's phone call, and I couldn't figure out how to cancel without making things worse. They arrived at exactly 2:00. David was wearing a suit jacket, like this was a business meeting. Angela had a leather portfolio under her arm. We sat in the living room. I offered coffee. They declined, which felt ominous. "Mom," David said, clearing his throat, "we've put together some information we think will help you understand our situation." He nodded to Angela, who opened the portfolio and pulled out several printed pages. She slid them across the coffee table toward me. I picked them up, put on my reading glasses, and started to read. It was a budget. Their budget. But formatted like a business proposal, complete with charts and projections. Monthly mortgage, $2,800. Car payments, $950. Insurance, auto, home. Health, $1,200. Utilities, $400. Food and household, $800. Angela's wellness expenses, gym. Supplements, therapy, $600. Debt payments, credit cards. Personal loans, $1,500. Entertainment and travel, $500. Total, $8,750 per month. And at the bottom, in bold, shortfall, $3,200. Below that, a line labeled, Eleanor's contribution, $3,200 month. I read it twice, trying to process what I was seeing. They'd actually created a spreadsheet that included my money as a line item, as if it was already theirs, as if my contribution was a given, not a request. "As you can see," Angela said, her voice calm and professional, "we've been very thorough. We're not asking you to fund anything frivolous. These are basic living expenses." I looked up from the papers. "Angela, you have $600 a month budgeted for wellness expenses. That's not frivolous. That's health care. It's a gym membership and supplements. Mental health is health, Eleanor." I looked at David. He was staring at his hands, not meeting my eyes. "David, you make good money. Where is it going?" "We have debt," he said quietly. "What kind of debt? Does it matter?" Angela cut in. "The point is, we need help. We're your family, and we've been very patient, but we need an answer." I set the papers down. My hands were steady now, steadier than they'd been in days. "The answer is no." Silence. David's head snapped up. Mom, I'm not going to quit my job. I'm not going to give you $3,000 a month. I'm not going to fund a lifestyle you can't afford. Angela's face hardened. Excuse me? You heard me. Eleanor, I don't think you understand how serious this is. We could lose our house. Then maybe you need to sell your house and find something you can afford. I said it calmly. Kindly, even. But the words landed like bombs. I can't believe you're being so selfish, Angela said, her voice rising. I'm not being selfish. I'm being responsible. There's a difference, is there? Because from where I'm sitting, you're choosing money over family. No, I said, standing up. I'm choosing myself, and I'm choosing to not enable you to keep making bad financial decisions. David stood too. His face was flushed, his hands clenched. Mom, you don't understand. We're desperate. Then get help. Financial counseling. Bankruptcy if you need to. But don't ask me to go down with your ship. We're not a ship, Angela hissed. We are your son's family. And you're abandoning us. I think you should leave, I said. Mom, David started. I think you should leave, I repeated, louder this time. And I think you need to understand something. I love you, David. I will always love you. But I'm not going to set myself on fire to keep you warm. Angela grabbed the portfolio and stood. This is unbelievable. Come on, David. But David didn't move. He stood there, looking at me, and for just a second I saw something in his face. Was it shame, regret? I couldn't tell. Then Angela grabbed his arm and pulled him toward the door. You're going to regret this, she said over her shoulder. Maybe, I said, but it'll be my regret to carry. The door closed. I stood in my living room, shaking, wondering if I'd just made the biggest mistake of my life, or the bravest decision. That was only the beginning of the real battle. For 3 days, I heard nothing. No calls, no texts, no angry voicemails. Just silence. I tried to go about my normal life. Went to work at the library, where Emma asked me if I was okay because I seemed sad. I told her I was just tired. Tended my garden, though I kept losing track of what I was doing and finding myself just standing there, staring at the dirt. Went to dinner with Margaret, who held my hand across the table and told me I'd done the right thing. But doubt is a powerful thing. It creeps in during the quiet moments, whispers in your ear when you're trying to sleep, makes you question every decision you've ever made. What if I was wrong? What if they really were desperate? What if something terrible happened and it was my fault for refusing to help? On the 4th day, my phone rang. Unknown number. Mrs. Patterson? This is Linda Chen from Adult Protective Services. My blood went cold. I'm calling because we received a report of concern regarding your welfare. The caller indicated you may be experiencing cognitive decline and having difficulty managing your daily activities. I'd like to schedule a home visit to follow up. Who made the report? I asked, though I already knew. I'm sorry, that information is confidential. But I want to assure you this is just a wellness check. Nothing to be worried about. Would tomorrow afternoon work for you? What choice did I have? Yes, that's fine. I hung up and immediately called Patricia. They filed a false APS report? She said, and I could hear the anger in her voice. That's a new low. What do I do? You cooperate fully. Show them you're competent and independent. I'll draft a letter to send to APSI explaining the situation and providing context. And Eleanor? Document this. Date, time, what the caseworker says, everything. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to understand how things had gotten so twisted. How had my relationship with my son, the boy I'd loved and raised and sacrificed for, turned into this? A power struggle, a manipulation, a war. What I didn't know was that it was going to get worse before I found my way clear. Linda Chun arrived at 2 o'clock the next afternoon. She was younger than I expected, maybe 40, with kind eyes and a professional demeanor that put me slightly at ease. She asked to tour my home. I showed her everything: the clean kitchen, the organized bedroom, the bathroom with my medications neatly arranged, the garden I maintained, the calendar on my refrigerator where I tracked my work schedule and appointments. We sat at the kitchen table and she asked me questions. Could I tell her what day it was? Who was the president? Could I describe my daily routine? Did I have any trouble managing my finances or remembering to eat or take medication? I answered everything clearly, calmly, with a kind of detail that proved I was fully present and capable. Mrs. Patterson, she finally said, I don't see any cause for concern here. Your home is well maintained. You're clearly managing your affairs competently. You seem healthy and oriented. Can you tell me what the report said? What concerns were raised? She consulted her notes. The caller reported that you'd been forgetting to eat, leaving appliances on, getting confused about dates and appointments. They were worried you might not be safe living alone. None of that is true. I can see that. She paused. Can I ask, do you have any idea who might have made this report? I hesitated. Part of me wanted to protect David, to keep this private. But a larger part of me knew that silence was how manipulation thrived. I believe it was my son or daughter-in-law, I said. We've been having a conflict about money. They asked me to financially support them and I refused. Since then, they've been making comments about my age and my ability to care for myself. Linda's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes. I see. That's unfortunate. What happens now? I'll file a report indicating that the concerns were unfounded. The case will be closed. But Mrs. Patterson, if you feel you're being manipulated or exploited by family members, there are resources available. Elder abuse takes many forms, including financial exploitation. The words elder abuse made me flinch. I wasn't a victim. I wasn't some confused old woman being taken advantage of. Except, wasn't I? After Linda left, I sat at my kitchen table and cried. Not delicate tears, but the kind that come from somewhere deep and raw. I cried for the relationship I'd lost, for the son I thought I knew, for the innocence of believing that family meant safety. But I also cried because I was angry, furiously, righteously angry. They had tried to weaponize the system against me, tried to paint me as incompetent, as a problem that needed solving. All because I dared to say no. That was only the beginning of understanding what I was truly up against. I started documenting everything. Patricia had been right about that. I created a folder, physical and digital, with copies of every text message, every email, every call log. I wrote down the dates and details of our conversations, the money I'd lent over the years, the request to quit my job, Angela's phone call, the APS report. I also got a letter from my doctor confirming my physical and cognitive health. Had my lawyer draft a statement explaining the family situation. Gathered my financial records to prove I was managing my affairs responsibly. It felt paranoid, excessive, like I was preparing for a court case instead of dealing with my family. But that's what it had become, hadn't it? A case, with evidence and testimony and sides. The hardest part was accepting that David had chosen a side. And it wasn't mine. Margaret came over one evening while I was organizing the folder. She found me at the dining room table, surrounded by papers, looking like I was preparing for battle. "Oh, honey," she said, and pulled up a chair. "I feel crazy," I admitted. "Like I'm overreacting." "You're not. You're protecting yourself. That's not crazy. That's survival. But he's my son." "How did it come to this?" Margaret was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Can I tell you something I've never told anyone?" "Of course." After my sister died, after Corinne died alone in that nursing home, I found her journals. She'd been keeping them for years. And you know what broke my heart? She knew. She knew her kids were using her. She knew they were manipulating her. But she kept giving anyway because she thought that's what mothers do. She thought if she just gave enough, eventually they'd love her the way she needed to be loved. Did they? No, they loved what she gave them. But they never saw her as a person, just as a resource. I thought about that, about the difference between being loved and being useful. "Eleanor," Margaret said gently, "you can't make David love you the right way by destroying yourself. All you can do is decide what you're willing to accept, and what you're not." 2 weeks passed. The silence from David was absolute. No calls, no texts, not even a cold email. It was like I'd ceased to exist. I threw myself into my routine. Work at the library became a refuge, a place where I was valued for what I did, not what I could give. I started a new project organizing the local history collection, something I'd been wanting to do for years but never had time for. Emma brought me a drawing one Wednesday, a picture of me reading to her group, with flowers all around the edges. "Because you're always happy when you read to us," she said. I taped it to my refrigerator and cried in the bathroom for 10 minutes. Margaret and I started taking morning walks together 3 times a week. We'd loop through the neighborhood as the sun came up, talking about everything and nothing. She told me about her grandchildren in Colorado. I told her about the volunteer work I was thinking of starting at the women's shelter. Life slowly began to feel manageable again. And then, 3 weeks after our last confrontation, David showed up at my door. He was alone. He looked terrible, dark circles under his eyes, rumpled clothes, an exhaustion that went deeper than physical tiredness. "Can I come in?" he asked. I stepped aside. We sat in the living room, the same room where everything had fallen apart. I made tea chamomile, his favorite when he was little and couldn't sleep. I remembered sitting with him through countless childhood nightmares, bringing him warm milk and chamomile tea, and staying until he felt safe enough to close his eyes. "Angela and I are separating," he said. I felt a jolt of surprise. Not because I was sad for him, but because I realized I wasn't. I was relieved. "I'm sorry," I said, "because that's what you say. Even when you're not." "I'm not. I mean, I am, but—" "Mom, she's been—" He stopped. Started again. The apps report was her idea, I figured. I didn't want to do it. I told her it was wrong. But she said it was for your own good. That you were being stubborn and unreasonable and someone needed to step in. Do you think I was being unreasonable? He looked at me, really looked at me, and I saw tears in his eyes. No, I think you were being smart. And I think I've been an idiot. David, no, let me say this, please. He set down his tea with shaking hands. Angela and I have been living beyond our means for years. The house, the cars, the vacations, all of it. We kept thinking we'd catch up, that my next raise or her next business idea would fix everything. But it never did. And instead of dealing with it, we kept looking for someone else to fix it for us. You looked to me. Yeah, we did. And that wasn't fair. I know that now. What happened with Angela? I told her I wasn't going to keep pressuring you for money, that we needed to figure this out ourselves. She said I was choosing you over her. I said I was choosing to be an adult. She didn't like that. He gave a bitter laugh. She's moved in with her sister. Says she needs space to figure out what she wants. What do you want? I want to fix this. Not with her. With you. He looked at me, and I saw my boy again. Scared and sorry and struggling. Mom, I'm so ashamed of how I treated you. Of what I let Angela talk me into. Of all of it. I wanted to forgive him immediately. To wrap him in my arms and tell him it was okay, that we'd get through this, that everything would be fine. But that's what I'd always done. And that's how we got here. David, I love you. I always will. But I need you to understand something. What you both did hurt me deeply. It made me question my own judgment. It made me feel like I was just a resource to be exploited, not a person to be loved. I know. I'm so sorry. Sorry isn't enough. I need to know that you understand why it was wrong. Not just that I was upset, but why asking me to give up my life for yours was fundamentally unfair. He was crying now, real tears that he didn't try to hide. I do understand. I've been so focused on what I wanted, on what I thought I needed, that I forgot you have needs too. Dreams too. A life that matters just as much as mine. Those words, simple as they were, cracked something open inside me. Because that's all I'd wanted. Just to be seen as a whole person. Not just a mother, not just a source of support, but someone whose life had value on its own terms. What I didn't know was that understanding was just the first step. Rebuilding would take much longer. David and I didn't fix everything that day. We couldn't. Wounds that deep take time to heal. But we started talking. Really talking. Not about money or expectations, but about feelings and fears and all the ways we'd hurt each other without meaning to. He told me about the pressure he felt to be successful, to give Angela the life she wanted, to prove he was worth something. How that pressure had turned into panic, which had turned into desperation. I told him about the loneliness after Richard died. The way I'd clung to my job and my garden and my routines because they were the only things that felt solid. How his requests for money had made me feel like those things didn't matter, like I didn't matter except as a solution to his problems. I never meant to make you feel that way, he said. I know. But impact matters more than intent. He nodded, absorbing that. Over the next few weeks, David came over for dinner once a week. Just him, no Angela, no agenda. We'd cook together. He'd forgotten how to make half the recipes I'd taught him growing up and talk about his plans. He was selling the house, moving into an apartment he could actually afford, seeing a financial counselor to deal with the debt, going to therapy to figure out why he'd let things get so out of control. I keep thinking about Dad, he said one evening, stirring pasta sauce. How hard he worked. How careful he was with money. How he always said that debt was a chain around your neck. He did say that. I wish I'd listened. You can start listening now. He looked at me, a small smile on his tired face. Yeah, I guess I can. Angela filed for divorce 3 months later. David told me over Sunday dinner, his voice neutral, like he was reporting the weather. How do you feel about it? I asked. Honestly? Relieved. We weren't good for each other. I can see that now. What happens with the house? She gets half the equity once it sells, which isn't much after the realtor fees and paying off what we owe. But it's something. And you? I'm okay. Better than I've been in years, actually. He set down his fork. Mom, I know I've apologized before, but I need to say it again. What I put you through was wrong. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you know that I see you now. Really see you. I know you do, I said. And I did. I could feel the difference. In the way he asked about my day at the library. In the way he remembered Emma and asked if she was still loving the horse books. In the way he'd started helping with my garden, not because I needed help, but because he wanted to spend time with me. We were building something new. Not the relationship we had before, that was gone, broken beyond repair. But something else. Something more honest. More equal. It would take time. Years maybe. But we had time now. 6 months after that first terrible conversation in my kitchen, I made a decision. I retired from the library. Not because anyone pressured me. Not because I couldn't do the job anymore. But because I wanted to. Because I was almost 69 years old and I'd earned the right to spend my mornings however I wanted. My last day was a Friday in October. The staff threw me a small party cake and coffee in the break room, speeches about how much I'd meant to the children's section. Emma's grandmother had secretly organized it, and Emma presented me with a card signed by all the kids I'd read to over the years. We'll miss you, Miss Eleanor, Emma said, hugging me tight. I'll miss you too, sweetheart. But I'll still be around. I'll come visit. And I did. Once a week, I'd stop by the library and browse the new arrivals, chat with Sharon at the circulation desk, say hello to Emma if she was there. But mostly, I filled my days with other things. I started volunteering at the women's shelter Margaret had told me about. Twice a week, I'd go in and help women navigate family conflicts, financial abuse, the complicated process of setting boundaries with people who'd spent years tearing them down. I told them my story. All of it. The loans, the manipulation, the apps report, the slow, painful process of learning to say no. Did you lose your son? One woman asked me. Almost, I said. But I found myself. And eventually, we found each other again. In a healthier way. I also joined a gardening club. Made new friends who shared my love of hostas and daylilies and the meditative work of tending living things. We'd exchange plants and advice and complaints about deer eating our tulips. I took a watercolor class at the community center. Turned out I was terrible at it, but I loved the quiet focus it required, the way the colors bled into each other in unexpected ways. I traveled a little, nothing extravagant, but I finally made it to some of those places Richard and I had always talked about. Margaret came with me to Savannah one spring, and we walked through the historic squares, ate too much seafood, laughed until our stomachs hurt. I built a life, not a big life, not a dramatic one, but mine, completely, entirely, unapologetically mine. David met someone new about a year after the divorce was finalized. Her name was Rachel, and she was different from Angela in every way that mattered. She was a teacher, practical, grounded, with a laugh that reminded me of sunshine. She didn't care about expensive cars or designer clothes. She cared about books and hiking and her students. The first time David brought her to meet me, I was in the garden. She rolled up her sleeves and helped me plant bulbs without being asked, chatting easily about her own attempts at gardening and how she kept killing her tomatoes. I think I overwater them, she said. Most people do, I told her. Plants are more resilient than we think. Sometimes the best thing you can do is leave them alone and trust they'll figure it out. She smiled at me, and I knew she understood I wasn't just talking about plants. They got engaged on a Thursday in November, 2 years after David and Angela separated. David called me immediately after proposing. "Mom, I want you to know this time it's different." "She's different. We're building something real. Something sustainable." "I can tell," I said. "I'm happy for you, honey. Would you—" He paused. "Would you help us plan the wedding? Not money, just your time, your advice. I want you to be part of this." My eyes filled with tears. "I'd love that." And I did. Rachel and I met for coffee every few weeks to talk about venues and flowers and all the small details that make a wedding special. She asked my opinion, really listened to my answers, treated me like family in the way Angela never had. The wedding was small, beautiful, held in a garden not unlike my own. I wore a lavender dress and flowers in my hair and cried happy tears when David promised to love and honor and cherish this woman who saw him clearly, flaws and all, and chose him anyway. At the reception, David pulled me onto the dance floor for the mother-son dance. As we swayed to the music, he leaned close and whispered, "Thank you." "For what?" "For not giving up on me. Even when I gave you every reason to." I squeezed his hand. "You're my son. I'll never give up on you. But I also won't lose myself for you. There's a difference." "I know," he said. "And I love you more for knowing the difference." I'm 72 now. 3 years have passed since David asked me to quit my job and fund his life. Sometimes it feels like a lifetime ago. Sometimes it feels like yesterday. David and Rachel live in a modest house 20 minutes away. He's doing well at work, promoted twice, managing his money carefully, building a stable life. They're talking about children now, and the idea of being a grandmother fills me with a joy I'd almost forgotten I could feel. We have dinner together once a week, sometimes at my house, sometimes at theirs. We talk about real things, not just surface pleasantries, but feelings and struggles and the work of being human. He asks about my life. Really asks. Wants to know about my watercolor class and the book club I joined and the woman at the shelter who reminds me of myself at 50. And I tell him, not to burden him, but because he genuinely wants to know. Because our relationship now has space for both of us to be whole people. I still live in my house with the yellow curtains and the garden that blooms new every spring. My days are full volunteer work, friends, hobbies, the slow, sweet work of building a life that feels like home. Margaret and I still take our morning walks. She's 75 now, a little slower but still sharp as ever. We talk about our grandchildren, hers in Colorado, mine yet to come, our aching knees, our gratitude for having survived long enough to become ourselves. "Do you have regrets?" she asked me the other day. I thought about it. I regret how long it took me to set boundaries. I regret teaching David that love meant sacrifice instead of respect. But I don't regret where I ended up. "Good," she said. "Neither do I." Last week, I was working in the garden when David and Rachel stopped by unexpectedly. Rachel was glowing in that way that made my heart skip before she even said the words. "Eleanor, we have news." I set down my trowel, brushed the dirt from my hands. "We're pregnant," Rachel said, beaming. I pulled them both into a hug, laughing and crying at the same time. "Oh, I'm so happy for you." "We want you to be really involved," David said. "Not to raise the baby or anything, just to be grandma." to teach them about gardens and books and how to set boundaries. He smiled. All the important stuff. I'd be honored, I said. Later, after they'd left and I was alone again in my quiet house, I thought about what was coming. A grandchild. A new generation. A chance to love without losing myself. I thought about all the things I'd learned the hard way. About boundaries and self-respect and the difference between helping and enabling. About how saying no can be an act of love. About how you can forgive someone without letting them back into the spaces where they've hurt you. I thought about the woman I'd been 3 years ago, standing in her kitchen, holding a dish towel, being told to give up her life. How scared she was. How confused. How close she came to saying yes just to keep the peace. And I thought about the woman I am now. Still scared sometimes. Still learning. But solid in a way I'd never been before. Rooted like the oak tree in my front yard, weathered by storms, but still standing, still growing, still reaching toward the light. This morning I woke up to frost on the windows and silence in the house. Made my coffee. Watched the sun rise over the garden, turning everything gold. In a few hours, I'll meet Margaret for our walk. This afternoon, I'm volunteering at the shelter, helping a woman my age figure out how to protect her savings from a son who thinks love is spelled M-O-N-E-Y. Tomorrow, Rachel and I are going shopping for baby things. She wants my advice on cribs and car seats and all the overwhelming choices new parents face. My life is small, quiet, ordinary in most ways. But it's mine. And that simple, hard-won truth is everything. I think about all the women who are where I was 3 years ago, standing in their kitchens, holding metaphorical dish towels, being asked to give up everything for someone else's comfort, being told that love means sacrifice, that good mothers never say no, that their own needs don't matter as much as everyone else's. I want them to know something. Something I learned too late, but not too late to matter. You are not selfish for having boundaries. You are not cruel for protecting yourself. You are not a bad mother for refusing to destroy yourself for your children. Love without boundaries isn't love. It's surrender. It's erasure. It's the slow death of everything that makes you who you are. And you, whoever you are, whatever your kitchen looks like, whatever demands are being placed on your time and money and life, you deserve to be more than a resource. More than a solution to someone else's problems. More than a source of money or time or energy. You deserve to be a whole person, with dreams and boundaries and a life that belongs to you. It took me 68 years to learn that. It took losing almost everything to understand it. But I understand it now. And I deeply, truly hope that you won't take as long as I did to see yourself clearly, to know your worth, to understand that the people who truly love you won't ask you to choose between loving them and loving yourself, because real love, healthy love, makes space for both. The question I'm left with, the question I ask myself on quiet mornings when I'm drinking coffee and watching the garden wake up is this. If you've spent your whole life being told that your value lies in what you give away, what would it take for you to believe that your value exists simply because you do? And if you really knew, bone deep knew, that you deserve to take up space, to have needs, to say no without guilt, what would you do differently starting today? I can't answer that for you. But I can tell you that finding your answer might be the most important thing you ever do. For me, it meant the difference between slowly disappearing and finally truly learning how to live.